So this is my story, and I've often kind of looked at my story or thought of my life as just a life. There's nothing much of it. However, I've been taught, or God's taught me over, the few years that I've been a Christian, that every story is important. No matter what you think of your story, no matter where you've come from in your life, your story is so important. And it's our story to share. My life has been, I think it's been pretty easy. It's been fairly good so far, and I am so thankful for that. I'm so thankful for the different things that God has done in my life, because I know that it could have been very different. I know that God has always been there for me, and ever since I was very little, so I don't know how little, but very little, I always knew that God was there. I've always believed in God. I don't think I've ever really doubted his existence. So I was born on the 18th of September 1994. So I am 24 years old, turning 25 in a few months. So my life can actually be broken up into two halves at this point in my life. So my childhood years, where I was born and I grew up, can be, that half is in Alice Springs. So I was born in Alice Springs in the Northern Territory. I grew up there. And then the next part of my life, to where we are now, was when we moved to Yeppoon, and I've grown up in Yeppoon through my teenage years to becoming a mum. So that's kind of childhood is there, and growing up is there, and I guess I'm on to the next part of being married and with kids. So that's this next chapter that I'm living out and seeing what God does throughout this time. So 25 has always been a year that I've been looking forward to, because that's when your insurance goes down for cars. So I'm reaching that point of my life, and then I don't know what age I'll look forward to next. I don't know. But anyway, as I was looking through these photos and preparing, I feel like when you prepare for your testimony, it's always a great time of reflection and looking back over all that God has done. And I was looking at this photo, this one of me playing the piano, when I think I would have been about 3 there. Yep, I think I was 3. And I was looking at that photo, and it was like God just said to me, like, I knew what you were going to be doing. Even when you were this big, when you were playing the piano or trying to play the piano, I knew that you would be doing that same thing many years later. And the verse, Psalm 121, I think verse 7 and 8, it says, "The Lord keeps you from all harm and watches over your life. The Lord keeps watch over you as you come and go, both now and forevermore." And I was just so aware that, looking at reflecting, just knowing that God knew me then, and he knows me now, and he'll continue to know me. And that goes for each and every one of us. So as I said, I grew up in Alice Springs. And this is just a little picture of the Alice Springs Catholic Church, and my dad and I in the Catholic Church, I think for someone's christening. I'm not sure which baby that was. But this was my very first experience, the Catholic Church was my first experience of church, and I don't really remember too much about it because I was 3, maybe 4. I do remember that we got cordial after church, and there was a rock about, I don't know, to me it was pretty big, and I used to climb up on it and jump off after church. But I also remember going to the front of the church one morning with Dad when it was a time of communion. And I remember he shared some of the bread with me that morning, and I don't really remember what that looked like for everyone else, but I remember being really excited to be part of what was happening at the church. And so, even from this young age, I just knew that God existed, and I'm so thankful to my parents for putting that into me, that teaching me about God, praying with me, and just as I grew up, giving me those opportunities to hear about God and learn about him and his love for me. This picture is a picture of my primary school, the first primary school that I went to. It was then called Araluen Christian School. It's now something different, but this was the first primary school I went to, and I think I was there until the start of grade 2. I changed schools, but this was a place that really impacted my thoughts on God. It was a Christian school, and I remember we prayed every day, and I remember that it was through this school that my family became connected to the Baptist church, which was where we ended up going to church for the rest of my life in Alice Springs. That became our church family, and that was where I started to go to Sunday school and learn more about God. So these are my very first 2 school photos. I was in transition, which is the equivalent to prep here in the little smaller one, and then in the light blue shirt, I was in grade 1. And so this school, again, taught me more about God, and I remember I wanted to read the Bible because they had this really cool one at school, and that was the one that they used, and so we got that same one, and I just loved it because it had really cool pictures and really cool stories. Grade 1, this is my grade 1 class, and this was, I think, one of my favourite years of primary school that I remember. This was also my favourite teacher. His name was Mr. Warner, or Chris Warner. And looking back now, I think he must have been a really young teacher, like straight out of uni into teaching these grade 1 kids. And I don't really remember what he taught us at school. Who remembers what they learned in grade 1? But I do remember that he would tell us stories and he would take us on adventures. I don't know if you'd be allowed to do that same thing anymore, but we went on adventures outside of the school property. But one day he shared chips with us, like hot chips, and he gave each one to us kids, and we thought that that was awesome. And another time, I remember my hair fell out, and I went to him and asked him to fix it for me, and he had no idea how to do a ponytail because he didn't know how to do a ponytail, and I made him do a ponytail for me. And he tried, but I remember having prayer time in this classroom, sitting in a circle with my peers on the floor, praying together, praying and thanking God for our food and for our water, and just praying for each other. And looking back now, I'm so thankful for that experience and think what an amazing privilege to be part of that when you're 5 or when you're 6. And I'm just thankful for that opportunity. This second photo up there is myself and my friend Daniel. We grew up together. I don't really remember when we became friends, but we did primary school together. And his family was a big part of our family. We're basically family. So this is the Baptist church that I went to. This is a photo that I got off Google. It's now no longer the Baptist church building because when we were moving to Yeppoon, they had just finished, I think, or were going through their massive building project of moving from this building to their new building. And then we moved here and kind of went through a similar thing, but different. But this is just a photo of the building that I grew up in, a church building that I grew up in. And this is inside that building, and there's a little photo of us. I think you might be able to spot my brother Jordan and myself there, maybe. But I remember doing Sunday school there, and we did our little Sunday school performances. I think this was one of them, and we're up on the stage. I don't really know what we were doing. But yeah, this is my brother Jordan, and that's me. And so we did Sunday school. And again, I'm so thankful that my mum and dad sent us to Sunday school, that we went to church, and were able to do that because I know that those seeds were planted right then, even from that very young age. So in grade 2, I changed schools, and that's my friend Daniel and I. We changed schools together, and we went to Larapinta Primary School, and it was a public school, and I loved that school. It was a public school, so we didn't pray together, and so that was different. But I had many different opportunities at that primary school, and just loved going to school there. And I also think that it's funny because that school uniform reminds me of a certain school uniform of some of the kids who go to school or live in Yeppoon here. So when we moved here, I was like, oh, that's like our uniform. But anyway, before I changed schools, Mum and Dad enrolled me into Taekwondo. So I was 6 years old and I started Taekwondo. This came as a result of me getting kicked by a 5-year-old boy when I was at school. So I don't really remember what happened, but there was a 5-year-old, he kicked me, and Mum and Dad said, that's it, we're putting you in self-defense classes. So off I went to self-defense classes, and I did that. That's basically my whole childhood. I did that right up until we moved when I was 12. So for 6 years. And again, I am so thankful for that opportunity that my parents gave me. I remember training with Dad. Dad would come and watch our classes, and he would train with me, teaching me how even the instructors moved their feet and keeping my hands up and different things. And throughout that time, I skipped over different belts, and before we moved here, I was able to achieve my black belt. And so I was 12, and I do have a black belt in Taekwondo, just letting you all know. But this was one of the hardest things that I had to do physically as a child. I had to train, when I was going for my black belt, I had to train every day. So it was a 6-year journey, and there were so many times when I just wanted to quit. So my friend Daniel did Taekwondo as well, and he quit. And I had some other friends who did it, and they quit. And so I often thought, like, why can't I quit? Like, their mum and dad let them quit. Mum, why won't you let me quit? Or Dad, why won't you let me quit? But my parents wouldn't let me. And by the time I got to my red belt, which was 2 away from black, I remember talking to Mum and Dad and saying, I don't know if I want to do this. And they said, you are so close to finishing this. You are about to get your black belt. You're going to push through. You're going to see this through. And so this taught me a few lessons. And I think this is a time that developed, some kind of grit in me, knowing that there's things that you just have to do and things that you can finish. So Dad would often film my gradings for different belts when you'd go up a belt. And looking back, I'm always just amazed at these little tiny people who did these flights, or routines. And looking back, it was exhausting, and really hard, but it was worth it. And again, I'm so thankful that my parents taught me the importance of seeing something through and committing, when you're committed to something, to seeing that through. And so that was a lesson that I learned through that. And so I guess I learned that pretty much anything that's worth doing is going to cost you something. And I was 12, it didn't really cost me too much, probably just energy and tiredness and afternoons where I could have been watching TV, but it was so worth it. And again, I'm so thankful for that opportunity and that Mum and Dad made me see that one through. So I got my black belt when I was in grade 6. I was 12 years old. I finished primary school, and then we were getting ready to move to Yeppoon. And I'm so thankful that it happened that way. I'm thankful that I had the opportunity to finish primary school and then start my next part of schooling in high school in a different town. My siblings didn't have that opportunity. They kind of had to just go and finish primary school, no matter what grade they were in. But this is my siblings and I when we were a lot younger. Juliana is about the same size as Abigail, smaller than Abigail. She was 18 months when we moved here. And I know that this was a really interesting and hard time for my family because there were so many different opportunities in Alice Springs that they could have taken on. I remember from my side of the story, Dad had just started a job working in real estate, and he was really well known in Alice Springs. Lots of people would come to him wanting him to sell their house, and that's an awesome opportunity if you're in real estate. People wanting you to sell their house. Mum was teaching kinder music, and the other kinder music teacher had just left, and so she would have had the opportunity to gain all of her students and keep that business going. But we moved here, and Mum and Dad stayed here. I'm sure that it must have been tempting for them to go back because of those different things that were going on. But I know that God kept us here. And God was so faithful as my parents were obedient to him. And again, that wasn't easy for them. It was kind of easy for me, but it was worth it. So we moved to Yeppoon to be closer to family. And this is a picture, that was just the picture of our family that I could find, but that's my mum's parents and our cousins, and, well, not all of our cousins, but some of our cousins. And we moved here to be closer to Grandma and Granddad, and I think the rest of the cousins all moved close by as well. So we were able to have those times with our family, and I know that it was really important, big part of God's plan for my mum to be here for her parents and us to be here for Grandma and Granddad. And so again, I know and can see Mum and Dad's obedience to God in that. So as I said before, I started high school when we moved here. And this is my grade 8 photo, and I think it is so embarrassing, but I hear you laughing at the back. But high school was a time when we all grow up, and I grew up, and we make many important choices about ourselves in high school. And it's where we really, I guess, start to discover who we are, what we want to do, where we're going to go, and so much. I say so much happened in my life in high school. It did, but it didn't. It's just high school. But that was where my faith in God changed and my relationship with him changed. So there's a photo of myself in grade 8. And then when I finished grade 12, my dad walked me into my school formal, and my grandparents actually drove me in their car. And it was just such a beautiful family time. And there is Juliana in the little back when she was little. But high school was interesting. High school was hard for different reasons. So when I was in grade 9, I gave my heart to Jesus. We'd been going to the Yeppoon Wesleyan Methodist church for about a year. And it was just before, I think, Pastor Ron and Karen moved here. We were not in this building yet. We were still at Queen Street. And I remember youth group used to be at Pastor Ron and Karen's old place out in Tamby Road. So this must have been around 2008. I remember sitting on their lounge room floor. It must have been, I think it was a Bible study night. And prior to this, I had believed in God. I'd been going to church, and I would often sneak out into Sunday school and help with the kids, look after Juliana, just because I didn't really feel like hearing the message, to be honest. And so I would go and sit with Juliana, and that was what I remember doing, and that was church for me. But I started going to youth group, and God started to convict me on some different things. And so I was sitting on the lounge room floor, and I don't really remember what they were talking about, but Revelation 3:20, the verse that says, I sit at the door and knock, and whoever hears my voice and opens up the door, I will come in and eat with him and he with me. And I could feel Jesus just knocking at the door to my heart, saying, you have to make this choice for yourself. You can't just say that you're a Christian. You have to own it. You have to own your faith. And so we had the opportunity to pray a prayer, and I remember just sitting there with my head down, a little ball, and I prayed it. And then afterwards, Pastor Ron said, if you've made that commitment tonight, will you just let me know and raise your hand? And I did not raise my hand because I have no idea. I guess I was scared. I don't know why I didn't want him to know at that point, but I was just scared. So the next morning, I woke up and I remember everything looked so different. It looked so clear and crisp and beautiful. I still needed my glasses on, but it was like putting glasses on for the first time is the only way I can explain it. I remember I told my parents, and I remember I told our neighbour, who was a Christian as well, and we were just able to share that exciting time together. I also started going to the Saturday morning prayer meetings with my mum, and I am so thankful again for that opportunity to be able to do that. And I remember just being so excited about Jesus and so excited about what he's done. Just when you first become a Christian, that just excitement about the Lord. And so I remember reading my Bible every day, and I remember talking to people in my class about the Bible, and they kind of would just, I went to Yeppoon State School, they would kind of just look at me like, yeah, weirdo. And that's okay. I remember doing Bible studies at the high school, so we had some of our youth group kids. I remember Mimi and these guys. We would sometimes go and have Bible study in the chaplain's office with Chappie Pat. And I remember the very first time I read Galatians 5 was in one of those Bible studies, and it was just so brand new and so exciting, and it all just came to life for me. In these years, so from grade 9-ish, we had Bible study at Tuesday nights at our home, and that was led by Bert Bunny. And I remember going through Christianity Explained with that group and just loving being able to be part of that Bible study and learning more about God and what Christianity really meant. That it was more than just going to church on Sunday mornings. It was about that relationship. And I think it was around this time, I'm not too sure when, but I also did the personal discipleship course with Pastor Ron at some point. I think I'd already been a Christian for a few years, but I did personal discipleship with Pastor Ron and Karen, and Libby did that for a little bit at that time as well. And that was a really special time. I had no idea what the future held, but looking back, I'm like, what a privilege it was to be able to go through that with my future mother and father-in-law, who I had no idea that they were going to be my family later on in life. So these are some high school camp snaps. And I think this was my second high school camp. And it was always a highlight for me in high school, is still a highlight for me now. It's my favorite week of the year, and I look forward to it so much, because it's just a time where all of us learn more about God, learn more about our relationship with him and with others, and just that opportunity to grow in our faith and to see him work. My very first high school camp, I was grade 9, and I ended up deciding or being able to go the day before camp, which looking at now was really frustrating to the camp director. But prior to that, I had no idea how I was going to get to camp. And the Friday night before camp, Pastor Ron said, look, if you want to go to camp, you should pray about it. God will get a way for you to get there. And so I said, okay, because we couldn't afford it. So I prayed on the Friday night, and on Sunday morning, there was money there for me to go to camp. And so that for me was the very first time that I've recognized God had answered one of my prayers. So I went to high school camp, and that was at Camp Kanga. This is, I think, my second high school camp. This is in Yeppoon. And one year, I remember all of us campers, not all of us, but there were a fair few campers. On one of the nights, we made different commitments to Jesus, and we just made this circle, and we were just praying for each other, and it was just amazing being able to be part of that. And now as a leader, when we see those things happen at camp, it's just awesome seeing God work in the lives of these young people. So high school camp was a massive part of my walk with the Lord, and I guess, still is to this day. But that was a big part of my high school life. Another part of my high school life was band. So I did instrumental music for my whole high school life. This is my friend Alex and I in high school playing our bassoons. So what Alex is actually playing tonight, we played that in high school, and we also dressed our bassoons up. So here we have some bassoonicorns with the pink horns. We've got school ties. I'm not sure if you can see that, but they had matching school ties. We had Christmas bassoons and we had Easter egg bassoons. We just dressed up our instruments. That was just us. We were a bit weird. But band was a massive part of my high school life. Growing up, we went to different Eisteddfods, music competitions, and it was always a lot of fun. A lot of fun. Just a big part of my high school life, I guess. But as I did say, high school brought different challenges, good times and different bad times. I always found myself getting pulled back into different old habits because of my non-church friends. I would often find myself stuck in a sin confess cycle, like what I talked about at church last week. So I was struggling with the different friends that I had, and I remember going to high school camps and going, okay, God, I need to have different friends. And then I'd go to school and try and sit with my Christian friends, but then I'd get pulled back in with my non-Christian friends, and it was just a hard time because I really wanted to have lots of friends, as you do in school. In grade 12, for me, was 2011. It was when I hit rock bottom, and I came to a point where I realized I was living two very different lives. I had my church life and my school friends' life. I think I was okay at home. I don't really remember what mum and dad remember of that. I guess they can answer that question. But I remember, just seeing that I was going through this downward spiral. And I remember sleeping over at a friend's house one day, and I was in this downward spiral. And they started talking about the Bible, and this family were not Christians. And they were saying things about the Bible that I knew was not true. They were saying things about God that I knew were not true. And I tried to speak up and say things, but I couldn't because I was not living the faith that I believed in. I was not living the Christian life and following Jesus as I kind of said that I did. But I just couldn't. I didn't have any words to say. So this was one of my first realizations that I had backslidden. And I think for me it was around May or June in 2011 where I kind of reached my breaking point. A non-Christian friend of mine told me, he said, I know that you're a Christian. I know that you have strong faith in God. And the way that you're living right now doesn't add up. You told me that you want to live your life for God and glorify Him, but what you're doing is not what He wants you to do. You're breaking His heart. And sometimes I know that God uses non-Christians sometimes to speak to us, and I heard that loud and clear that day, and I broke. And I knew I was in the wrong, and I just ran to Jesus and I just confessed everything, and He forgave me and He welcomed me back with loving open arms, and I knew that I had been forgiven. And so from that point, everything changed. I think I went to high school camp after that, and that was again a time where I was able to recommit and get back on track with God. And then after that, so it was winter. This is winter, I was baptized. And this was, again, that turning point in my life. I remember I had started again. So from this point after my baptism, I started to spend most of my lunch breaks in the library, studying, doing homework, doing my assignments. And it did kind of become a little bit lonely, looking back at grade 12. But I knew that I would rather be doing that than hanging out with my friends who would influence me back the wrong way. Something very interesting about my baptism day that I only really recently found out was a conversation between my then future in-laws. Karen said something like this to Ron, Pastor Ron. She said, "You've just baptized your future daughter-in-law." And he said, "I know." And so at this point, Jonathan and I were not dating. And hearing that now, I'm like, wow, that's weird. But also really cool. So I was 16 at this point when I was baptized. And I love that we're able to be baptized in the ocean and Yeah, and I also love that was winter and it was not cold. It was perfect. It was a beautiful day. But it wasn't long before this guy came on the scene. And so before I finished school, so like a few months later, Jonathan and I started dating. This is one of our very first photos together. And I absolutely love it. That was a youth group day at the beach. But I first met Jonathan back in 2008. Before I had become a Christian. I think it was when Pastor Ron and Karen were moving here. I don't know if it was when they were doing, before they moved here or when they moved here and started pastoring here. But I remember his first service with us at the Queen Street Hall. I was on the music team playing saxophone, and I think he was just here. He could do data, so he was thrown on data for that morning. He also came to youth group a few times, and I remember thinking, oh, the poor kid, he has no friends. He doesn't know anyone here, so I'm going to be his friend. And that was where that friendship kind of started. He went back to Gympie and had no idea who I was, and I don't really know when he knew I was a person. But he moved back. He moved to Yeppoon when he finished school in end of 2009, start of 2010, he moved here. But I remember, must have been in 2010, we were at a wedding here in the church, and there was a young adult couple who got married, and I remember just being here and overhearing Jonathan talking to someone else, and he said to them, oh, I wonder who I'm going to marry, and I had a voice in my head say, it's you, and I was like, what? Like that, you can't think those thoughts. What is that thought? Take that thought out of your head, put it to the side. That's really weird because you can't think that about people. And so I just moved on with my life until obviously we started dating. But looking back, just thinking about that thought and how God managed to bring us together, I'm so thankful that my family was able to move here and his family was able to move here. And that now we have a little family. But moving on, it was around this time, so I finished grade 12. It was around this time that I became part of the young adults group, and we would do Bible study. And this was one of our Bible study nights years ago. And it was when Sean and Sam, who were American missionaries, were here. And Sean and Sam in particular, had a big impact on my life out of school. She would take me out for coffee, we would have catch-ups, and she would just check up on me and ask me how I was doing with in my walk with the Lord. And we started this girls' group Bible study, and it was an in-depth Bible study. We had 5 days of homework during the week, and then we'd come together and watch an hour-long Bible study, and we'd talk about it. And I remember, I don't remember what series we were doing, but we were meeting in the church sanctuary right here. Over this time, I had struggled with fear of death. I was worried that I would die and I wouldn't have done what God had called me to do. I was worried about what would happen to my family. I was worried about how it would happen, just this fear of death. And I also struggled with nightmares. I would have what I call lockdown nightmares, and I would just be so scared of the school lockdown drills that happened. So whenever those happened, I would freak out and just pray, even though it was a drill, just because I was terrified. It was a big fear that I had for years. And some of you may remember, I used to be terrified of loud noises, balloons, anything like that. If someone would come up and scare me behind me, I would just fetal position on the ground, just done. I was terrified. And I remember, never will forget the time that Sean did that to me. He just came up behind me, went rah, and I just fell into a ball. So scared. And then laughed about it. But it was a really big problem for me. And I just remember really struggling with this, but always not being sure if it was a problem. But thinking about it, it really was. So one night we were in here doing Bible study, and I just had this fear in my head, and it kind of all just bottled up, and it was just too much, and I just cried out to God. And I don't really remember what happened, but I remember we sat on the floor right there in a circle, and we prayed together. And I believe that night I was set free. I can't really explain what happened, but it was like God just came and he took those fears away. He told me that it would be okay, that he loved me and that I could rest in his love. Cast all of your cares, all of your anxieties onto me because I care for you. 1 Peter 5:7. And so I felt his love for me. And since that day, I'm no longer fearful of death. I'm no longer scared. I don't think I'm scared of people coming up behind me. I don't fall in fetal position anymore. And I can tolerate balloons popping, and they're not as scary anymore. So I know that God freed me from those fears. I also started studying Christian ministry and theology, so I started doing my Cert 4 through TSM, and I actually don't really have any photos of me studying, which I guess nobody really does have photos of you studying, but this is from when we went to New Zealand as part of the TSM course, and that was just a wonderful opportunity to go and see God working in New Zealand. But I started studying Christian ministry and theology after grade 12, and I had no idea what I was going to do. I did plan on doing a gap year in the army for a bit, so I was training for that, preparing for that, and I went for an interview in Townsville. I'm not really sure if I passed anything. I know that I didn't pass the psych test because they said that I would miss my family too much, and that's fair enough. But I remember going in to that interview that morning and just having the peace of God on my heart. I knew that I was not going to get in. It was like God was saying, you're not going to get in, I've got other plans for you. And so before I even stepped into the door of where I was going, I knew that I wasn't going to get in. So I just kind of enjoyed that day, just sat in the aircon, hung out, and just went through what I had to do. But I knew that I wasn't going to get in. I had another idea of going to study music through CQU in Mackay because I play saxophone. I was just going to take that and play music there, but that didn't happen, and I ended up staying here and I studied, and I'm so thankful that I did. And I do think Jonathan probably had a lot to do with that because we just started dating around that time. But through that study, I've had the opportunity to do youth group and be doing what I'm doing today. And this tiny photo on the edge is in 2015 when I became a pastor of our church for the first time. And I'm so thankful for that opportunity. And I feel like I've said I'm so thankful for different opportunities, but I genuinely am. I'm so thankful for all that God has been able to do in my life. So I also started leading youth group. So I was 17 years old, straight out of high school, I started leading youth group. Sean and Sam moved back to America, and I was put into this position. And I did not feel qualified or ready at all to be leading youth group for people who were basically the same age as me. And it was hard because leaders were older than me. I was leading people, who were older than me. That was tricky, but God taught me different lessons. And again, I'm so thankful for that opportunity. But 1 Timothy 4:12 was the verse that I clung to. Don't let people look down on you because you're young, but set an example through your love, faith, speech, and purity. I think that's what the verse says. So even if you feel like you're too young, even if you feel like you're not equipped or mature enough, don't worry. If God's called you to do it, you just have to do it. And he'll take you to the places and do the things that he's going to do in his plan and in his timing. And so that was 7 years ago. I've started doing youth ministry. And listening to Pastor Ron's testimony, he said he did youth for like 25 years. I'm like, okay, we've got about 20-something years to go. But so excited for that. So the next part of my life is, I guess when I really started living, when I was married. So we were married on the 13th of December in 2013, and I love this photo because it's just a photo of my family. So I've got Juliana and Kelly and my friend Alex and myself and Pastor Ron, Jonathan, his brother Simon, my brother Jordan, and my brother Jacob. And it was just a beautiful time together as a family, and of course it was exciting because we were getting married. And so this is us just married, sitting on these stairs down here. We had our wedding and our reception at the church just over there, and we actually did sing 2 songs in our ceremony every day that we sung tonight, and Jesus Be the Center that we sung this morning, because that was our heart. We wanted our marriage to be centered on we want our marriage to be centered on Jesus and have him as the focus of our wedding day, but also for life. So yeah, that was our wedding day. Super thankful for that. And we moved into this little house, and you might remember this house from a testimony a few weeks ago. So the Nobles used to live in this home, and before we were getting married, Rachel talked with the owner and organised that we were able to live in this house. And that was such a blessing and perfect for us. This home was just an amazing blessing for us. And this is actually a photo just after Cyclone Marcia. I didn't have any other photos of it from when we were living there, so that was then, and it survived the cyclone. But God provided for us in many different ways. He provided that house for us, and he provided a house full of furniture, and it's kind of tiny, but this was basically all of our furniture. Our church family are so generous, and someone in our church family was moving and wanted to get rid of everything, and so she gave us a house full of furniture for so much less than it was worth, and just so thankful for that. And we've still got those couches and the fridge and the dryer and all those different things to this day. The next part is when I became pregnant with Abigail. So this is when I was 7 weeks pregnant to when I was 40 plus weeks pregnant. But it was in this time that God provided for us in amazing ways again. So throughout our time living at the Causeway House, because that's where that house was, the Causeway, our landlords often said, okay, I'm going to be coming back and living in this house, so you're probably going to have to find another place to live. And this kind of happened on and off again a few different times. And so we started looking for a house, and we're thinking, are we going to build? Are we going to rent? Are we going to buy? What are we going to do? And God provided a house for us again, except this time it would be our own home. So in 2016, we bought our first home. We'd been praying for this house. And she said at the start of 2016, our landlord said she was going to be back at Easter. She wasn't back at Easter, but by June, we had found a home to live in. And so that's where we moved. This is just some very early photos of our house, and it's where we live today. And so again, so thankful for that home and how God provided that house for us, because we had no idea what was going to happen, but he brought this house along, and it was actually used to belong to a lady who came to our church, and it was just really nice to know that prayer had happened in this house already, and we were able to have prayer in that house continued on. And so this home is where we've brought up our kids, and I think where we intend to bring up our kids, but these are our little babies, Abigail, Grace, and Josiah Lane. And they have been some of the biggest lessons for me. I guess kids will always be lessons for you. That's what I'm picking up through the stories that parents tell me, but even though we've only had kids for 2.5 years, because that's how old Abigail is, they've just taught me so much of what God's love is, his love that is just unfailing, his love that is always there for you. And he's also taught me what it is to be selfless, and I recognize now just how amazing parents are and how selfless parents are, because you have to be. And so, just thankful for my little babies and for our family. And so this is just our family, and I've got a photo of Pastor Don up there. Pastor Don is someone who's been just so instrumental in my faith journey. He always is encouraging to me, and has just taught me so much. He taught me most of my TSM subjects, and still teaching many different lessons to me as we go. So he will be speaking for us at high school camp this year, and I'm really excited to hear what he has to share with us. And so I guess that brings me up to today, where we are now, and looking back over my life from when I was this little girl playing the piano who had no idea what she was going to do, to now where I'm so thankful that I get to be part of this church family, that I get to be able to share on a regular basis with our church family. I had no idea that that was what I was going to be doing when I was in high school. I had no idea that I was going to be a pastor, but God did. And God knows exactly what each one of us will do. So things I've learned over my life is that God is faithful. God is the ultimate provider, and he has the perfect plan for us. And I do want to finish with Psalm 71, verses 14 to 23. And I came across this psalm. I remember reading it for the first time, or maybe not the first time, but it was like the first time when you read the Bible and it just stands out to you. But in 2013, and it was like, for me, it was like God gave me this as a prayer for my life. It says, "As for me, I will always have hope. I will praise you more and more. My mouth will tell of your righteous deeds, of your saving acts all day long. Though I know not how to relate them all, I will come and proclaim your mighty acts. Sovereign Lord, I will proclaim your righteous deeds, yours alone. Since my youth, God, you have taught me, and to this day I declare your marvelous deeds. Even when I am old and grey, do not forsake me, my God, till I declare your power to the next generation, your mighty acts to all who are to come. Your righteousness, God, reaches to the heavens. You have done great things. Who is like you, God? You will increase my honor and comfort me once more. Though you have made me see troubles, many and bitter, you will restore my life again. From the depths of the earth, you will again bring me up. I will praise you with the harp for your faithfulness, my God. I will sing praise to you with the lyre, Holy One of Israel. My lips will shout for joy when I sing praise to you, I whom you have delivered." And so that is my prayer. I pray that my life would always point to Jesus, that I would be able to declare his marvelous deeds, since he's taught me from when I was young to even when I'm old. I pray and hope that I will continue to share what he has done in my life. So thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of my story, because you, my church family, are a massive part of this story. And so I am forever thankful for each of you as well.